Good, very good, very good. So today's sermon is going to be about today's gospel, obviously. But this is the first of many trials for Peter. In order to get away from the multitude of people that were on the land, Jesus decides to get into a boat, a specific boat. He gets into Simon Peter, who at the time was named Simon. His name was not Peter yet. He gets into his fishing boat. And Simon, of course, at this time, wasn't a firm believer of Jesus just yet. He was halfway there. He was half and half about everything. He didn't really follow him per se. He did follow him. I don't know. He's kind of a teacher. He's kind of not of a teacher. So Jesus sits in this boat of Simon's. He gives a sermon or two to the multitude that are on the land while he is in the sea. And this is the Sea of Galilee. It's a different word in the gospel, but it's actually just the Sea of Galilee, where they all fish, and it's a common job there as a fisherman. Now, as Jesus finishes his sermon, he turns to Simon and tells him to cast his net deeper than where they were. This point right here is a turning point for Simon Peter. This point is where his whole life and everything that he believed and hoped and dreamed changed. I want you to think back to a moment with me. I want you to think of a life-changing event where you were faced with some kind of trial, and I don't mean a trial like you were guilty or not guilty or anything like that. I mean a trial where you were tempted, where you faced a situation, where you faced a tribulation. And in that trial, everything stood between you and everything that you have. You may have had no hope. You sat there without expression. You worried. You were uncertain as to the future. And then you were faced with that one important question that you asked yourself, what's my next step? What is your next step? Simon Peter had a very beautiful response to Jesus. After Jesus tells him to cast his net out into the deep, a little further from where they were, he says, "Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down your net." That's the interesting part right there in red. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down your net. We come up with all kinds of excuses, and sometimes we lose all sense of hope. Because in this example, Simon toiled all night without any fruit, without any results. The picture to the left, the little girl in the umbrella, this is external. Everything going on in that day. It's a rainy day, all that's going on, but you have an umbrella. To the right is internal. No matter what's going on the outside, you can say to yourself, I will not lose hope. And in that picture in the center is a very important picture. I don't know if you can see it, but some of us can see it very clearly. That word isn't go. That word is God. Sometimes in order to see God, we can't see that little D in there. The projector is probably not as great, but there's a little D there, and it's very blurry. Sometimes in order to see God, we have to let go. We have to surrender. We have to take control away from ourselves and give it to God. We have to let God do all the work for us. We come up with all sorts of excuses when we give up hope. As an example, when we study for our classes and we're not doing too well, we tell ourselves, why should I keep studying if I don't get the grades I want? Why? What's the reason to continue studying if all I'm getting is D, 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 C, whatever the case is? Another example is when God calls us to do something. Are we obedient? Do we say, even if I've already done it 1 billion times, God, if you ask me to do it, I'll do it. Nevertheless, I will do it. And I will do it faithfully. Forgiveness. is another example. How many times am I supposed to forgive? When somebody keeps hurting me over and over again, I need to forgive. But Jesus, in this verse, Jesus says, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. That's how many times you are to forgive. 70 times 7. Another example is loving. Sometimes we love a certain person, or we love a group of friends, or we love anything about a particular thing, but this person or this group is hurting me. This person or this group is picking on me. They are making fun of me. Why should I keep loving them? Why should I keep loving somebody who keeps hurting me? And all of these examples are just excuses. Nevertheless, the beautiful word is nevertheless. In spite of is actually the dictionary definition here. Nevertheless is defined as however or in spite of. I circled that for you. In spite of. An example of this is you don't have a job and you're looking for a job and you keep searching for a job, but you're not getting anywhere with this job search. What do? Nevertheless, you keep searching for a job. It's funny, right? Eventually you'll get that job. And if you don't get that job, you'll still keep trying to get that job. The whole point is nevertheless. Sometimes at certain points in our lives, we think we are smarter than God. And we try to battle with Him. We come up with these various excuses. Oh, I can't pray today. I don't have time. But what we really should do is surrender and trust Him. What do you mean you're going to fix everything for me if I do this, this, and this? How do you mean that I should obey you and follow this thing that you're asking me to do, God? It's going to be difficult, or whatever the case may be. Surrender and trust Him. Even though my mind comes up with all these excuses, I'm going to listen to your voice, God. That's the phrase. That's the example that Simon Peter gives us. Even though my mind comes up with all these excuses, I'm going to listen to your voice, God. We read from the Catholic epistle today. It talked about wisdom. A lot of the stuff, the ongoing theme of all of this is related. Everything is related in today's gospel, Pauline epistle, Catholic epistle, Acts, everything. And in the Catholic epistle, the beautiful phrase there was, but the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. That's that wisdom. We should follow that wisdom. We should forget about the wisdom that we have here on earth, because that wisdom means nothing. The wisdom that we obtain here from our works, our careers, everything that we do, nothing. The wisdom from above, glorious. That is what we should seek. In fact, when in our lives do we say, nevertheless, despite of all of our circumstances, I will follow you, God? When do we say nevertheless? When do we accept what we cannot change? Our situations are bleak, are tiring. When do we accept what we cannot change? In fact, as Simon Peter's example is justified here, when God calls out to you from the waters, decides to plant Himself firmly in your boat, sitting down, what do? We are all variations of Simon Peter. Jesus has, in some way, came into our lives, sat in our boat, and decided to show us a miracle or two. But the miracle is not the fish. We'll get into that. In your hour of frustration, do you see God? The example to your right, this Pure in Heart church, I believe it's in the middle of Africa somewhere. And I loved the name of that church. It's called Pure in Heart Church. Where did they get that from? They got it from one of our beautiful Gospels. Blessed, it's from the Beatitudes, and it's in the 6th Gospel of the Igbeah. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This church is saying, hey, look at us. We're pure in heart because we see God. We see God. God exists in my church. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Probably the most ultimate example of nevertheless that we are given is in that Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus had blood coming out of his face. He was on his knees praying fervently, and he was full of passion and love and all kinds of negative emotions, scared, anger, hopeless, all these things. In all of this, in all of his frustration, in this hour of desperation, he says, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. That is a beautiful example of nevertheless. I'm going to give you guys a quick little story here about a guy named Danny Glokey. I don't know if you know him. He's from American Idol. I'm not condoning the watching of American Idol whatsoever. But I want to talk a little bit about Danny Glokey. He was a musical director for his church choir. He married his high school sweetheart in 2004. His wife, Sophia Martinez, encouraged him to sing. She saw something very good in him. She said, oh, you have such a beautiful voice. You have such an ultimate talent that God gave you. You should continue to sing. So she encouraged him to sing. She supported him. She even loved this show, American Idol, and she encouraged him to audition on this show, in American Idol. So he did it. 4 weeks before his audition at American Idol, his wife died due to complications of congenital heart failure, a birth defect, something she's had since she was born. At that point, Danny Glokey, he did not want to move on. He lost everything. He lost his best friend. He lost everything. He didn't want to move on in the beginning, yet he faced a life-changing event that affected him for the rest of his life, just as Simon Peter faced that question on that boat. Cast your nets out into the deep. But Danny Glokey took his negative and turned it into a positive. He had no wife at that time, but he had hope. In fact, that hope inspired him to become a very successful Christian singer. And on K-Love, he sings all day and night. Every hour there's a Danny Glokey song on there. He brought many people to Jesus Christ. That's the key here. He became a fisher of men with this life-changing event. He took that negative and he brought positive to any heart that he touched, any soul that came his way. He said, have you heard of Jesus? He brought Jesus to everyone. His lyrics are so profound and they capture exactly what he felt when he was going through this turmoil. His lyrics are, for one of his songs, There's Hope in Front of Me. That's actually the name of the song, There's Hope in Front of Me. Written at the time where he lost his wife. I've been running through the rain that I thought would never end, trying to make it on faith in a struggle against the wind. I've seen the dark and the broken places, but I know in my soul, no matter how bad it gets, I'll be all right. There's hope in front of me. There's a light, I still see it. There's a hand still holding me. Even when I don't believe it, I might be down, but I'm not dead. There's better days still up ahead. Even after all I've seen, there's hope in front of me. Back to Simon Peter. I keep jumping around, but everything is related somehow, some way, all these examples. Simon, of course, in obedience response to Jesus Christ, casts his net out into the deep farther away and ends up catching many, many, many fish. But that's not the miracle that happened that day. That's also related to us. That's not the miracle that goes on in our life. When you see the fruits produced, when you see that God does something for you that you've been praying for a long time, that's not your miracle. That's not your miracle. Your miracle is in the inside. What that miracle does to you, how it affects you, how it changes your heart, changes your soul, changes your mind, That's the miracle, and that's the miracle Simon Peter felt that day. Sometimes we follow what God says, but we are fixed on the many, many fish. God's plan isn't about the fish. It's deeper than that. It's inside of us, because God calls us all to be fishers of men. We are all Peters. We are all the rocks that God calls us to be. We are all His holy church. Another example of this, 2 Corinthians 4, verse 18, from the Pauline epistle today. I tell you, everything is somehow related in this gospel. I encourage you to go back to the Pauline epistle, to go back to the Catholic epistle in your quiet time. Everything has a point. For the things which are seen are temporary. An example of this is the fish. What he saw was the miracle of the fish. This is just temporary. But the things which are not seen are eternal, fishers of men. God calls you to call out His kingdom and grow it. In response to all of this, Jesus says to him, do not be afraid. From now on, you will catch men, mankind, even women. All of you are not simple fishermen. You are not out to catch fish. You're all out there to catch men or women and bring them all to salvation. We don't have to wait for something bad to happen in the example of Danny Glokey. We don't have to have that happen. Because Jesus can come into our life and change things around and tell us to follow Him. In fact, let's take a look at this example. Saint Moses the Black, probably one of the best examples of a life-changing event. He didn't experience death. He didn't experience all this stuff or anything like that. He just decided one day, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this. He led a life of sin. It was even said he may have murdered a few people in his life. He was a very violent individual. Couldn't suppress his anger, his emotions, and all these things. All the qualities of negativity were embedded in his soul. He did everything bad. But at the same time, in all that he did what he wanted to do. He felt completely alone and miserable and empty inside. So what did he say to himself? He heard somebody say, there's these monks in the desert. Go out to them. And he went out to the desert. This was his life-changing event. He went to go look for God in the desert. That's it. You don't have to wait till somebody dies around you. You don't have to wait till all these things happen. You don't have to wait to write a song or anything big or studying your test and you pass the test and whatever. It can be as simple as you looking for God is your life-changing event. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a life-changing event to experience God. It just means, and there's people that have multiple life-changing events. Look at Simon Peter. When Jesus looked at him in the eye, and he said, when he had told him, you were going to deny me. Peter looked him in the eye and was like, you're right, I did deny you. And he went outside and wept bitterly. That was another life-changing event. When he was crucified upside down, that was another life-changing event. Saint Moses the Black, he met this monk in the desert, Saint Isidorus, who taught him how to fight the devil. Saint Isidorus then finally led him to Saint Macarius the Great. This was all around 365 AD, around that time. At that point, when he was learning about God, when he was learning how to fight the devil, when he was learning all these things, he had his heart was very burdened. His heart was very full of repentance. It was like, what am I doing with my life? That same kind of repentance that Simon Peter said, go away from me, for I am unworthy. When he said that to Jesus after he saw this miracle, he realized how completely inadequate he was and how holy Jesus was. So at this point, St. Moses began to confess, and all his sins were publicly confessed to everyone. And in this time, St. Macarius the Great, he saw a tablet somewhere next to him. It was all filled with black words and all this stuff, and every sin that St. Moses the Black yelled out loud to everyone turned into white. And at that point, St. Macarius afterwards told him, St. Moses, you are no longer St. Moses the Black. You are St. Moses. You are no longer Moses the Black. You are Moses the white, for you are now pure. Eventually, Saint Moses, with this life-changing event, led a life of holiness. All it took was for him to go searching for God in the wilderness. In your quiet time, reflect on many things. I urge you, reflect on these few things. Reflect on any life-changing event that happened in your life. Reflect on how many blessings you have right now. Because there's a lot. There's a lot of blessings. I'm breathing air right now. I could not have air. I am eating very well. Look at me, I'm fat. I could not have food. I have sight, I have vision, I have hearing, I have all these things, all kinds of things, even the things that we take for granted, we have. Reflect on the fact that Jesus has a future for you and a specific plan for you to become a fisher of men. Ask Jesus what that plan is in your life. If you don't know that plan, ask for it. Because God calls you to be a fisher of men. How to be a fisherman of men is what differs from person to person. Not this person's role is to be a fisher of men, this person's role is to be a doctor. No. Every single soul is called to be a fisher of men, and the only difference of being a fisher of men from the other person is how you are going to bring people to God. Finally, this was also in one of the epistles. It was the Pauline epistle. This is the second half of it. It's a very beautiful verse. For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. No matter what goes on in your life, no matter how upside down your life may get on this earth, you have a home in God. On this earth, you have a home in God, and when you get to heaven, He's prepared a beautiful mansion for you. So think about that in your quiet time. And think about that and reflect upon that. But most importantly, reflect on the many blessings that you have that you are maybe taking for granted these days. You don't have to wait for Jesus to come to your boat. He may be sitting in your boat already. All you have to do is say, nevertheless. And glory be to God forever. Amen.